Welcome back to the virtual speaker series. My name is Adian. I use the pronouns he, his, and him. And today we have a very special Movember episode. Not only do we have a guest speaker, but we also have a guest host. Hosting today's episode is John Gausman, and John is involved in the Men of Color Success Initiative, which is run through the Men of Masculinity program here at Cal Poly. He is also the community outreach coordinator for the Black Student Union on campus, and he is a representative of the Black Academic Excellence Center to the Dean of Students Advisory Council. We're excited to have John host today. Before we get right into this episode, I would like to ask our viewers to hang around till the end of this video and take our post-video assessment. The assessment will be accessible through a QR code on the screen, as well as a link in the description below. With that, I would like to say welcome and thank you for being here, John.
Thank you. So, Cal Poly family, I'm here to introduce you to Dr. Jamal J. Myrick. He is an esteemed member of the UC Riverside community, and among other things, is a father, a brother, a self-published author, and he currently works with all members of the African diaspora at UC Riverside. Today, he's going to join us and talk to us about finding joy in the face of adversity, otherwise known as stubborn joy. And I'm not an expert on that. He is. So we're going to listen to him and let him take it from here.
Okay, thank you, John, for that wonderful intro. And thank you, everyone, for being present with us today, wherever you are. So whether you're in sunny Southern California, Central California, or, over back home, maybe in Florida, shout out to Florida. And I've already heard all the Florida jokes, so you can save them for right now. John, I'm looking forward to our conversation and really looking forward to sharing ideas and exchanging thoughts during this real critical time right now. So again, thank you for inviting me into this space. Thank you for just giving me your time, because you could have been anywhere in the world, but you're here with us. So thank you, John. Thank you.
So I have some questions just to start us off. And how would you define stubborn joy?
So for me, stubborn joy is this concept, for some context. It's a concept that a classmate of mine who unfortunately passed away this past summer, who embodied it, right? He embodied this idea of stubborn joy, and I didn't realize it until after he was gone, unfortunately. And so for me, if you break down the words of stubborn and joy, right? I think about with being stubborn, I used to think about how my family was and how my mom used to be like, "Oh boy, you just so stubborn. Like you just will just have a bone, and you are just going to do whatever you want to do, and you're not going to change your attitude or position because you feel so strongly about whatever it is that, in this case, whatever we're talking about." And very similar, and then you add joy in there. And so to me, what I received from my dear friend and Dr. Luke McQuaqua, with stubborn joy is having this idea and this joy that no matter what's going to happen, your position and your attitude and the level of joy that you have is not going to change. It's not influenced by whatever's going on in the world. It's not influenced by whatever's going on at work, because you can still have joy. And I can talk a little bit more about him, because again, he to me embodies like the utmost of stubborn joy, and I've learned so much from him, and through our doctoral program, and I've got to see this stubborn joy in action. And if you want, I can continue, we can hold off on that part of the conversation, and I can share a little bit more about it a little bit later.
Do you think this is a choice, like this joy factor,
Mm-hmm.
and how someone approaches life or an experience? You think this is a choice that people can make?
Mm-hmm.
Do you think this choice is lacking among people, men, Black men? Where are we valuing this as a society?
Yeah. So I would actually say, I think for a lot of us, and what I mean by us, I'm specifically saying for Black men, because that's the positionality that I hold. So for me, I think we don't know if it's a choice because we haven't been taught that joy is a choice. Depending on where you come from, right? I can only speak from my experience and my collective of folks that I hang around. But I think about with me now as a grown A man, so to speak, um, this idea of joy, this idea of healing, confronting your traumas, that wasn't something that I was taught when I was younger, right? This idea of having stubborn joy in the face of adversity or when things aren't so peaches and cream, I wasn't taught that at a young age. So I couldn't make that choice, right? I didn't know that that was an option for me. And so when I hear your question, I think about I mean, it's not new anymore, but this idea around Black boy joy from a few years ago. And I think when you're younger, it's more palpable to who you are. But when you're a little older, you kind of already been through life a little bit. That might be a little bit more difficult of a concept to understand if you haven't been taught what joy looks like. And I've been in places where I've seen it and I'm like, wow, like that dude is joyful, like just happy, just excited about life, regardless of what is going on. And so I do think at some point, once you're kind of exposed to it and once you kind of know how, then it's a little bit easier to incorporate into your life. But the first step is we have to be able to have the dialogue and to have the conversation to say, this is what this looks like. And here's how you can incorporate it. Right. I think about with me, and I have, you have mentioned in my bio, like I'm a new father. So I just had a newborn baby a few weeks ago. And there's no manual to that, right? Like you can read all the books in the world. And trust me, I've read them, not all of them, but I read a lot of books in the last 9 months, and nothing prepared me for what I'm experiencing now, right? Like when I hold my daughter and I'm joyful because she's alive, right? And I sit in that and I hold that and I hold that with power and I hold that with treasure because I know what the world is and I know what the world can be. And when I look at her and she's like smiling and she's just engaged, like to me, it's like, wow, like you haven't been tainted by the world yet. Let me teach you what joy can look like. Let me teach you what healing can look like as you're progressing on in your life and you're growing up in this world as a Black body. So
And that is really powerful, especially as a parent to
mhm.
start developing that and passing that down to the next generation.
Mm-hmm.
Really is really important. And when you were talking, a quote came to mind, or like something I remember Dr. Maya Angelou saying that you can only do what you know.
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
Exactly.
And so like you really, if you don't know about it, it's really hard to develop it, from scratch,
Mm-hmm.
invent the wheel in that way. So
Exactly.
that is a real that's a real thing. Do you think there's any what's behind this? Like, what's behind not knowing it? What's for
Mm-hmm.
Black? What's behind that? That's my next kind of follow up.
Yeah. I think it's multifaceted. In how in that answer. So I wish I had like the one and done answer, but it's much deeper than that, right? So I mean, yes, we can go back into history, and I think particularly in the Western civilization here in the United States of America, the quick answer is slavery, right? But if you really go deeper into our history didn't start at being enslaved, right? Like, so I want to make sure I put that out there. Our history goes way, way back. And so I think from my particular lens, I think we're not recreating, but we're passing down, like you just said, generations, right? We're passing down thoughts, we're passing down behaviors, we're passing down ideas that, like you just said, you don't know what you're only doing what you know, right? And so and I, again, speaking for myself, and I just had this conversation with my own father, about breaking trauma, right? And so and breaking bad and negative behavior. So he reached out to me and he's like, oh, you need to go and have this conversation with my mom and expose my granddaughter to her great grandmother and this and this. And I said, I'm particularly choosing not to do that. The buck stops with me. I'm not going to allow my daughter to experience pain and hurt by this person, because this person has done this much hurt to my family. And so when I think about why, I think a lot of times generations before us haven't been taught, or they weren't taught what that can look like in action, right? I think there's that piece. I think there's the narratives that are being shared, right? So when in Western civilization, I feel that joy is tied to the material things, right? Joy is how much money you got in your pocket, particularly for where I sit as a Black man. And I think a lot of times it's how much money you got in your pocket. What are you doing? You had mentioned social media before we had got onto our recording. And to me, that's a very dangerous place if you don't have your head and your heart in the right spot, because you might look around and be like, dang, I'm not buying my mom a house at 30, right? Like there's like that piece that kind of tells you what Black masculinity looks like. And so I think a lot of times we try to fit into that mold of what Black masculinity can look like and what does it mean in this particular time, right? In this particular day, what does that mean? And a lot of times it doesn't leave room for joy, right? It doesn't leave room for vulnerability. I've been seeing in the last few years a movement more towards healing Black men, spaces for Black men to kind of dialogue and talk about like what's going on with themselves, talk about what's going on in the community, and not in a debate type of way, right? But in like, let me help you, John. Like I see potential in you, I see energy in you that I want to pull out of you. So like, let's have some dialogue about what's happening and what's going on in the world. I'm happy about that. Like I mentioned to you when we first connected just not too long ago, I said like I went to therapy this morning, right? And my daughter is crying. And I think back to when I first started going to therapy, and I would tell people that they're like, "What's wrong with you? What? Are you okay?" I'm like, "Yeah, I'm fine." Like I go and get my car checked out when my oil is off or the light is on. Why wouldn't I go and get my heart and my mind and my body checked out when I'm not feeling right inside? And so I think, like I mentioned, I think there's a piece where we're trying to recreate or try to re-educate what we've been taught, right? And so we're just kind of passing it down. I think there's the narrative that's happening right now, as well as I think there's a connection to whiteness, right? And what whiteness and this white idea of what it means to be successful and what happiness looks like here in the United States and in the world. And so a lot of times we try to connect to that, or we try to plug into that, and that's not necessarily for us. Like the American dream wasn't necessarily built for Black folks, right? Like it wasn't for everybody. But the caveat with that is I think we're getting into a space where we're like, okay, we need to do our own healing. We need to redefine what these ideas and these concepts look like for us, because the American dream isn't, to me, for my own life, I'm not trying to subscribe to the American dream, like the buying a house, the wife and the dog and the white picket fence. I don't want that, right? Like that doesn't service my larger purpose and my larger goal in life. So
Yeah, I can truly empathize with a lot of what you said there in terms of having a value that doesn't like adhere to a general kind of American apple pie sense of goals and values, around materialism. And I think that that's a really constraining way for a lot of Black men to live, to be caught up in what they have and competing with the, with the Jones or whatever. I think it can be really, it can be a really unhealthy thing. And like what you said about social media, that it's a minefield. I think for anybody,
Yeah.
but I think for Black men especially so. I don't know if we need to get into that, but I think that was right. So just to, you kind of led me into my next question,
Yeah.
which is with all of the risks, adversity that Black men do face, and in a kind of general way, just walking outside the house, and even if you have the picket fence in the house that you're walking from, it doesn't necessarily protect you once you leave those doors. So with the risks and the kind of adversity, how important is joy, and how does it contribute to health? Because this month we are focusing on Black men's health, and I know this is a part of it, but I want to hear from you
Mm-hmm.
how this is a part of being healthy.
Right. So it's funny. So if you remember, there was this thing that happened last Tuesday, right? This huge thing, right, John? There was like this huge thing that was just like happening last Tuesday. And this thing that was going on, it's this thing called presidential election, this crazy thing that was happening. And I was in awe of how, as usual, Black folks made light of that situation, right? Like, and I think about the memes, I think about like some of the tweets about like trying to make this as light as possible, right? Like there was a tweet that said, "Don't worry about it, Nevada." Like it was something like, "Don't worry about it, Nevada. You can close your purse. We already got it paid for." Right. So it's like little things like that it's like, okay, I know it's hard right now. I know life is crazy, right? If you were like some of my scholars and my family, my colleagues, people were like really stressed out last week, like super pressed last week. Whereas I kind of took the stance of whatever's going to happen, I'm not going to allow that to affect me, right? Like, yeah, I might be upset for a little bit. Oh man, whichever way it goes, and still recognize at the end of the day, racism is still going to happen. Anti-Blackness is still going to be here. White supremacy is still going to show itself in all of these different institutions. And when I think back to that, I think about how even in the midst of everything that was going on, I still was able to find some reason to smile. A joke, connection, like connecting with others over social media, or even just like reaching out and doing phone calls and like kind of talking about it, but trying to make light of it. Because life is going to life, right? Life is going to happen. Life is going to move. Life is going to shake. So to me, even no matter which way the table folded with the presidential election, I recognize that all these things are still going to be very, very present. And it reminded me of when Barack Obama became president and everyone's like, post-racial, all right, everything is post-racial. Man, we are happy. America's united. We are unified. And it's like, no, it's not. Wait, what? Like, just because Black men got into the presidency, that doesn't mean that racism and all these systems of oppression are just radically done and like finished. Not true. And so what I found a lot of joy in those moments of just laughing and just connecting and finding light in this really dark space. And to your piece about how is this healthy for you and like how does this help in terms of wellness, I think when you are inundated with negative messages, when you're inundated with things that say you ain't ish or you don't matter or you're all you see is police or state sanctioned. I don't want to even just limit it to the police. When you see all state sanctioned violence and just negative stories, that does something to your psyche, right? And, if you are a more impressionable young Black man, what have you, you might really say, okay, I'm not anything. You could be like myself, right? Like there was a time in my life that you wasn't about to sit here and tell me that I was going to make it to 18. Right? Why? Because those are the messages that was around in my life at that time. Right? Like people used to tell me, oh, you're going to end up, just like your dad, you're going to end up in jail. or you're going to end up, selling drugs and all kinds of stuff. And you see that on the most prominent of media, right? Movies, television, music, books, right? And so when I think about that, why finding stubborn joy is so important is because when you're inundated with all these things, all these different materials, all these messages coming from you from all perspectives, you can take that in and say, you know what, in spite of that, I still am going to show up. In spite of that, I can recognize that. I recognize that these things are happening, and I'm still going to find some sense of joy. I'm still going to be able to find something that is still going to carry me to the next day. I was asked at the barbershop earlier in the summer, like right around the time George Floyd and everything was happening. And my barber asked me, he's like, do you believe that liberation is going to come from Black folks? And I said, yes. And he's like, why? I said, because Black folks have joy and they have hope, right? Like, to me, those two things, in the face of, you carry that, and it'll take you places that you've never imagined. And so I have to have those things, because once joy and hope stop, why am I doing the work that I'm doing? I can't sit here and tell my daughter, no, you're about to be a wrecking crew, like a one-woman wrecking crew. I can't sit here and tell her that if I genuinely do not believe that hope and joy are here and they're present, right? I can't sit here and tell her that, hey, daddy, yes, I see that another Black body was murdered by state-sanctioned violence. Like, she's going to come to me, right? She's going to come to me, and we're going to have that. We're going to have the conversation. And I can't allow her to sit there and hold that space. Like, yes, the system is against you, and you still have to find X, Y, and Z. You still have to find joy. And I am connecting now with John, another Black man at Cal Poly Slow, and I'm in Riverside, and how I see this Black man and I can recognize him, and I can still send power and energy to him from a computer. I still have to find joy in that. And like I mentioned just a little while ago, finding joy in the fact that, hey, I just went to therapy. My daughter is sitting here crying. I have to come up with a budget proposal a little bit later because my university is going through budget cuts, and still finding an opportunity to say, okay, I still need to find joy to carry me to the next day, to carry me into this space with John, to carry me with my daughter.
So now I'm wondering, because you just kind of opened up this little can for me. So what does is this a dialogue you have with yourself in a tough time? So, for instance, like I remember I woke up on my birthday one morning, and the first thing I saw was that Trayvon Martin had been murdered. It really put a downer on my day. And my mom was calling me like, "Oh, that could have been you," like, I'm really worried about you. I'm, I don't know if you're all right. And I don't know if you know about the Oscar Grant.
Yes.
But I was on the next train,
Oh, wow.
and they could have just came in and pulled me up. I don't know how they chose who to pull off that train. But kind of got the same call, the next morning from family, like, "Yo, are you okay? I just need to know." So that those kind of things, really can impact. You kind of like a vicarious traumatization.
Yes.
Even if it didn't happen directly to you, you're still traumatized by it.
Yes.
And I'm looking at this choice of stubborn joy as a way to mitigate that, kind of mitigate that harm. And so I guess my question is, like, on the inside, what does that look like? What conversation are you having with yourself? And if you can do that through an example or just like a template.
Yeah. So for me, that is a conversation that I do have with myself. And it is me creating boundaries, right? So a little bit later, I'm going to talk about self-reverence, right? And that's a concept from Dr. Darrell Brooks. And I'll kind of briefly touch on that, but then in my next session with you all, I'll actually like provide actual examples of that. But to your question, that's conversations that I have with myself almost every single day, to be completely honest with you. You asked, what does that look like in action? Because I'm a real learn by doing type of person. I journal, right? You know, learn by doing. You see what I did there? Which is true. I really am. But I actually do journal a lot. I reflect. I used to do, so like earlier this summer, right around the time of the George Floyd, and just like, I feel like it was a culmination of things at the end of May. And I took a, like a 30-day journaling experience. And I just asked myself questions, right? Like, what are you feeling in this moment? And to be completely honest, at that time, there was a lot of hurt, right? It was a lot of hurt. I remember when Trayvon Martin happened, you might as well just took my heart out, right? And then when that verdict happened, hot, I was angry. And I still had to show up to work, right? I still had to show up to work, and I still had to engage. I still had to be, right? And I think back to that, and I feel like I did myself a disservice, right? Like I should have been an advocate for myself. I should have journaled, because that's my practice. So I journal, I write on my website, I write in a few other spaces, and also set boundaries, right? Like setting boundaries. So most recently with the Ahmaud Arbery, the George Floyd, I made it a point. I did not want to watch that. I did like that. To me, that's part of my stubborn joy, is saying I'm not going to watch this video, this massacre that's been promoted on social media. I'm not going to do that. I don't want to. I still to this day, I have not watched the videos for myself, right? Like, there was a shooting out here in San Bernardino, which is fairly, 30 minutes away from where I'm at. I watched a little bit of it, but it was like the very, very beginning. So there was like no police interaction or anything like that. I have to do that. I have to stop doing that, because I remember Eric Garner. I watched that, cried. I remember looking at the Mike Brown situation and his body laid out in the street. Like, I remember seeing that. I remember hearing the police call about Trayvon Martin, and like this young Black child is like massacred. Tamir Rice. I remember these things, and I have made it the point to say I can't do that anymore, because it takes me to a place of feeling rejected. It takes me to a place of pain. It takes me to a place of I can't. And when I think about how I act this stubborn way, like I said, I journal, I set really strong boundaries, and I talk to myself, hey, how are you? Like, literally, I will ask myself, how are you feeling today? Where are we at? Like, in the morning, in the middle of the day, and then at night before I go to bed. I literally have in my calendar, it says, what are we working on today? Like, that is on my calendar. What are we working on today? Initially, that was for me and my mentee, because we would kind of go back and forth, where I would be like, hey, I'm working on this. This is like holding me accountable. But then it turned into, I need to hold myself accountable for this too. So what am I working on today? Well, I'm working on feeling competent, right? Okay, how am I going to do that? All right, I'm working on making sure that this week, or particularly today, I'll say, my goal is to, yes, show up in a really authentic space, or show up in my authentic space, being here, as well as showing up in my authentic self, right? And like, what does that look like? And to me, that is, of course, being present, but also being open to what the universe gives me in this time, right? And so that's in this conversation where I'm appreciating this conversation, because I get a lot of energy, I get a lot of joy from these types of conversations with other Black men, because a lot, like I mentioned a little bit earlier, there aren't too many spaces for us to have these types of dialogues and wrestle with these type of ideas. And then finally, I'll kind of end on this piece to your question. Something actual that I do. So going back to May, beginning of June, so you have all of these murders that are happening against Black bodies, right? You have my Black scholars, we're having a statewide Black graduation, right? My Black scholars are creating a list of demands of our campus because they're upset and they want to see change. I have a pregnant wife and I'm in the community with the NAACP and we're having all these things. And I go back to that moment and I think about I I had joy, right? I still found joy in each of these things. I still found joy in wow, my scholars really sat here and they created this list of demands to like really affect change. And now let me go tell them that, right? Like it's one thing to kind of say it, it's another to just kind of leave it behind closed doors, so to speak. So let me tell them that, wow, my wife is having a healthy baby, she's pregnant and she's okay. Wow, the world is burning, right? Like literally to me, I felt like May/June, the world was sitting here burning before our eyes and it was on camera. And I think about how, because a lot of times we think in a very dualistic sense, is good or evil, yes and no. And with stubborn joy and what I've learned from Dr. McQuarqua is you can have like all these things can be true, right? All these things can be true. I can be really excited because my Black scholars are getting ready to graduate and I'm literally sitting here driving to their homes to drop off their graduation items and they're sitting here crying because wow, I just achieved something. So bam, I'm holding that. I can sit here and be proud and be joyful for my Black scholars and my Black Student Union and the other Black orgs for creating the list of demands to essentially take the university to town, right? I can be hurt, I can cry, I can be disillusioned, if you will, about what's going on in the larger context. And I can be really excited about my wife being pregnant, and I can be really excited about the work that we're doing in the community, right? And all these things can be true all at the same time. And journaling about that particular experience was what was helpful for me. And so, really quick, I'm sorry, um, journaling, being able to set boundaries. For me, another piece was going for walks and telling myself, no, like, brother, you are valued. Like, you have value in this space. You have value in this world. Why? Because you're here, right? You're here for a purpose. And I'm always big on looking at the past. And I think about, talking about last week, I think about the ballot or the bullet speech from Malcolm X. And I think back to those people that have been here in theory before and also wanted to make sure that I learned those lessons because that's wisdom, right? When I'm able to learn from somebody else's experience so I don't have to do something, that's wisdom. And so I learned from those pieces and I take what our ancestors from past have done and I try to incorporate that into my daily practices as well.
So this sounds really accessible. This is that really just gave me a lot to work with right there, and I'm sure for other people watching. So now I want to kind of give you an opportunity to talk a little bit more like about how this ties into a recent book you've published, because I know that that's out there and people can go to the next level after this discussion and get that book. So can we get a little introduction into the book, where we can find?
Yeah. So my book is called Dear Black Dads, Wisdom for Your Journey to Fatherhood. And going back to our earlier conversation about what we've been taught and how we're passing things down generation to generation, real quick. So my relationship with my father was very difficult growing up, to say the least. If you know, right? So for me, as a new father, or at that particular time, I wasn't a father yet. My wife was pregnant, and one of the things that I've always been big on is like creating a different narrative for Black men. And it was the beginning of quarantine, so this was April. And I said, you know what? Let me actually do this. Like, I've been talking about this, writing a book, let me do it. I had conversations with my friends, and this is another piece of Stubborn Joy, is like tell people like why you're excited, tell people why you're happy, tell people why your joy is true. Um, and he told me, he was like, I remember you told me about this back in college, which is more than 10 years ago, right? Like, it's been a while. He's like, I remember you told me about that, and I'm really happy that you're finally about to do it. That's it. Like, that's literally all that I needed, because I was like, you're right. I remember writing about that in one of my journals. Let me go ahead and let me just do it, right? Like, quarantine, this is the beginning of quarantine. Everybody's, we're in this together, woo, right? And everyone, like, everything kind of slowed down. So I was like, let me just do it. And so Dear Black Dads to me is an ode to black men that are wanting to change the narrative, an ode to Black men who are wanting to say, you know what, I'm not going to do the same things that my parents did for me. I'm going to be intentional. I'm going to really be strategic about how I'm raising my child. So the book as a whole is words of wisdom and insight from about 27 Black dads, all different ethnicities, nationalities, backgrounds, job occupations, living situations, socioeconomic statuses. And it came together in a way that was so beautiful to me. I often refer back to my own book, like, and it's so funny to me that I refer back to that, to the book as I was going through my own challenges, and like as my daughter was getting here, I was like, oh my God, like, let me go back to my book, because I didn't really see something like that for us, right? I didn't see that on Amazon. I think there was particularly like 2 books for Black dads, like for the Black fatherhood experience. There's only like 2 books on there, and they're like older books. Like one was from like 1994, and I was like, well, whew, things have changed, right? Like technology, the idea around fatherhood, this idea around masculinity, this idea around being a parent, they've changed. Some things have changed. And so for me, I wanted this to be not only, hey, young man, hey, father, you just had a dad. Here's some things to kind of think about, from men that have traversed the lands before you. And also I wanted it to highlight, again, black men in a way that we are not always seen. And so in the book, you'll see, for example, one gentleman, he says, you know, because it's the last chapter, and it essentially talks about, you know, what's some of the final thoughts. And he said, whatever happens between you and the mother, you be there for that child. Right? Like it's so simple. It sounds so simple, but when I look around, I've told this to so many people. When I look around and I see some of my friends who aren't involved in their child's life, because it's like, oh man, you know, I have issues with the mom. And it's like, that's not an excuse, right? Like, and to just to read that one line, whatever happens with the mom, you be a part of that child's life by any means necessary, right? And so again, it's really not recreating, but changing that narrative and reimagining what Black fatherhood can look like. You know, you will read, or you'll hear, because it's also available on Audible, you'll hear some of the fathers talk about some of their own personal struggles, right? And trying to break some of their own trauma. Like, there's not too many spaces where I find that Black men are sitting here talking about their trauma and how their trauma is carrying on into how they're parenting. Very early on in the book, I talk about how I had to make a commitment, through reading as well as through therapy, that my goal of being a really great dad, a really great Black father, a really great Black dad, is not because of the hurt and the trauma that I experienced with my own father. It's just because I want to be a great dad, right? And so, like, again, reframing what this experience looks like. Like, to me, there's no greater accomplishment. There's no greater accomplishment. And I'm not saying that this is the one size. I'm not going to say it's like the one bullet that killed the vampire, so to speak. But what I will say is, I think a lot of Black fathers, whether you're older, newer, I think you can learn a lot from it, from the experiences of these men. It also includes some pictures, right? Again, my desire is always to change and to move forward the narrative of Black men as well as the Black community. And so as also in the book, you'll see different photos of Black fathers with their dads, right? They're just kicking it with their dads, right? Some have sons, some have daughters. You'll see them with their wives, so on and so forth. And that was important for me because I wanted people to see, like, they're like, Black dads are out here and they're out here rocking it. And it's not like this far away idea. It's right here in your hands, right? It's right here in your hands, and you can't compete that. You can't erase that. So that's kind of like the overview of the book, and tying it to Stubborn Joy. It was important for me to write and honor these Black men. And I found so much joy. Like when I told the guys, like, hey, you're going to be in this book, they're happy, like, just to get a sentence. And I had one conversation with one of that. He was like, I didn't even know that I just thought you were going to just take the story and just like leave me. And it's like, no. And he's like, wait, so I'm like actually in the book? I was like, yes, brother. Like, you are in the book, like on multiple pages, multiple chapters, your picture is in there. And like, I found so much joy in those moments. Like, that's not even about me. That's about giving these Black men who, not all of them, right? Like, not all of them have a platform. Not all of them have the space to kind of talk about their experiences, yet this space was created for them and it's going to live on, right? Like, they could always refer back to their child, like, man, your dad was in the book, right? Like, your great-great-granddad was in the book and was talking about you. So.
That is deep. Yeah, I'm a Black father myself. My children are 23 and 26, so they're a bit older. But I really look forward to reading your book. And I agree. Black fathers are rocking it more often than not when we choose to. And it's really good to see that there is something like this out here, that where Black fathers are actually creating their own narrative instead of letting society craft a narrative about us, where at least some of us, through you, are getting a chance to actually speak for ourselves. And I think that's really important and valuable.